All right, welcome everybody to a webinar hosted by Rustici Software and Watershed. We're right at 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll do a quick round of introductions, a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll dive right into the puzzling topic that we have today, which is measuring learning impact and making a business case for your learning technologies. I am Tammy Rutherford, the Managing Director here at Rustici Software and Watershed. And with me today, I have Chris Tompkins, who is our fearless leader when it comes to business development for both Rustici Software and Watershed. So Chris and I go way back. We've been working together for a little over 13 years now. We started at Rustici Software way back in 2011, even though Rustici's been around since 2002. So we've been working together at Rustici for a very long time, helping companies solve the problems that come up when you try to get learning technologies, whether it's content platforms to work well together, or implement the standards, or both. You'll find us in many conversations when the acronyms like SCORM and XAPI show up. So we're going to be the nerds that are going to help figure out the plumbing and help you put together the pieces and parts to support standards to make your learning products work well together. And recently, as of last year, we also took Watershed on. So we are now providing leadership for our sister company, Watershed, who, for those of you that might have been around for a little while, you might remember that Watershed was actually born out of Rustici. I think back in 2016, Chris, is when Watershed first kind of grew up and out of Rustici. So we are happy to be working with them now, and bringing the learning analytics side of the equation to the challenge. So we sort of see this problem of seeing how learning technologies work well together from start to finish, whether you're putting things together or trying to see what happened on the other side of things. So we feel like we've learned a lot along the way. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about what we've learned, particularly as it relates to making a business case for deciding what technologies to invest in and how to measure and make sure those investments did what you thought they were going to do. And ultimately, how do you share that with the rest of your organization so that they get inspired by what you're doing and ultimately let you continue to do that and invest more? So it is budget season, and we are all planning for 2025, and that often comes with being strategic about the asks that you're making to your organization. What do you need in your 25 budget? What do you need to protect? What do you want to add? And how are your initiatives in learning and development and training aligning with the overall business to really become more of a strategic partner? You'll notice here that we've got some puzzle themes going on. We've been doing a lot of puzzling at Rustici, and at Watershed. So you'll find, I think right now, even in our break room, we've got at least 3 different puzzles going on. And so, I think we all sort of got a little puzzly during pandemic, and some of those habits turned over and were brought into the office recently. So we've been doing a lot of puzzling. And when you think about it, putting together these business plans or making a case for your learning technology investments is a lot like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You get a big pot, you take a box, you dump out all the pieces on the table, and it can be pretty overwhelming. You've got a ton of pieces. You have the big picture, you know what you're trying to get to, but sometimes it's hard to figure out how those pieces fit together. All of the pieces fit together. You might be able to get, your sections over here, your edges and corners, your blue pieces over here, whatever it might be, but pulling it all together can be a little challenging. Similarly, pulling together your business case for your learning technology investments can also be a little challenging. So today we're going to dive in, talk about strategies for how you might build that business plan, look at ways that you measure success. So it's really a matter of, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? Do you know if it's working? And we'll talk about the tools that you might be putting in your toolbox to help figure those things out. And I love a good success story. It's a lot of times it's great to see what other people have done and mimic that. So we'll look at some success stories. Note of housekeeping before we dive much further. You'll see that we have a way for you to ask questions. So if you have questions along the way, please post them. We've got our wonderful marketing team behind the scenes with Tara, Alicia, and Abby, who will be looking at those questions and helping corral them for us. So we'll save time at the end to answer questions. So feel free, don't be shy to ask questions along the way. And a question that usually comes up, we will be recording this, as you know, we will be sharing the recording back to you at the end of this. So if you need to leave for any reason, or you're so inspired by what we talk about today and want to share it with others, you'll have a copy of that archive to pass along to others after we finish up. So yeah, with that, let's go ahead and dive in and see how we're going to put all of these pieces together to see the bigger picture. But Chris, the picture looks a little messy here. Walk us through this.
Yeah. So the e-learning industry has been changing over the last 20 years that Rustici's been around. And at the beginning, eons ago, we thought there would be one learning management system to rule them all. And if you're only a department of one and you have one piece of learning technology, being able to have insights into how people are training, what the outcomes are you in compliance, are you reskilling, are you moving things, is quite easy. But when we fast forward to 2024 and where we are today, I have never seen an organization of size that has one piece of learning technology that holistically handles everything, even from the big providers. It turns out when we start working with big brands and even medium and small organizations, you start hearing little stories. Well, we train over here for this thing, and oh, those contractors live here, and oh, these people are in this tool, and we use VR over here. It turns out we see on average 20 to 30 pieces of learning technology at a normal organization. And when that starts to happen, we're manually pulling together data. It is very hard to understand what the efficacy is of one program over another, and A/B testing anything becomes impossible. So, being able to wrangle some of this data together so that learning and development teams can understand what they're doing is really, really important. We could go on one more. And we see that there's basically two paths for an organization to be able to invest in things. You're either investing in technologies that can solve and wrangle some of these data challenges together. That could be consolidating your LMS into one bigger platform. It could be tools like Content Control or Watershed that do things. It could be other learning initiatives that drive licenses and drive products and implement solutions. There are tools in the toolbox that you can use to go solve some of these challenges. We also see learning and development organizations investing in programs. And this is not necessarily technology driven. What are the initiatives that the organization has, even from the top or at the department level? What kind of value will a change bring to the whole organization that L&D can drive? And importantly, when it's that type of soft stuff, how does L&D go back to leadership, go back to their team and say, hey, we can prove, we can measure this, we know the outcomes? If it's in 20 different pieces of learning technology, stitching the outcomes together is a nice to have, but it can often be the most valuable part of L&D's work, is to showcase the movement of training and learning and skills and outcomes within the organization. So today we're going to talk a little bit about sometimes you need to invest in the right tool in your toolbox, and other times we need to invest in a program that's driving change. Both are good, and often we see them done at the same time. Tammy, I think you're going to walk us through it.
Yeah, there's absolutely a few ways that we can be looking at the investment and the return here. So yeah, let's jump in. There we go. So yeah, so again, we have a pile of puzzle pieces here. Oh, oops, excuse me. We're jumping around a little bit here.
I think you're faster than the slides.
I am click happy over here. All right, so fingers crossed we stay on the slide. Yeah, as we talked about a little bit earlier, starting can often be a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of pieces to put together and figuring out how they all work together. As Chris mentioned, you've got a couple of different ways that you can show value to your organization on what you're investing in on the learning side of things, whether it's the technologies to help you do your job better, or it's the overall program that you're investing everybody's time in to improve the overall organization. So when you think about putting these pieces together, it's not unlike tackling a puzzle. There's a few different ways to get started. Over here, I've seen I'm a traditionalist when it comes to puzzling, so I like corners and edges to start with. It's pretty straightforward. I learned that other people approach puzzling differently, particularly our developers who might look at pieces and shapes together or colors together. So it doesn't really matter how you decide to tackle it. Having a strategy though and plan in place to sort of provide the foundation for what you're going to be looking at is really the right way to go here. And so we're going to follow my methodology, and we're going to start with the corners and the edges to help give you some framework for how do you even get started with this daunting task of helping show the bigger picture to your organization and gaining champions along the way. Um, and it all starts with, if we're talking about measuring the business impact, you got to have a goal in mind. You have to have an objective. What's the purpose of the investment that you're talking about? If it's introducing a new piece of technology, what does that get you? If it's aligning with the business goals, what is this training effort that you're putting in place? What do you expect to have happen on the other side? So every time we talk about measuring the impact of learning, we always start with the end in mind. What are your goals? We've seen this from the very beginning when XAPI first kind of came on the scene, and you could report on anything. The first question was, what should I do? And it's like, define what you want to know. So make sure that you have that question in mind. Have your objectives clearly aligned and outlined for you and your team. Um, you want to make sure that if you're investing in technologies, we'll look at some ways you might think about that. Usually that's going to be on the saving side of the scale that we're looking at here. How can your investment save your organization time or money? Those are really the two places you're going to try to figure out that return on that investment. Does it pay for itself? And if so, how? And then there's the more strategic, bigger picture that Chris was talking about. This is sort of the softer side, which can sometimes be a little harder to measure, around aligning with business goals. How does your L&D program support a larger business initiative? How does it support change management if that's what you're looking for, overall growth with the company? So again, we'll tackle these from sort of two different angles here, but that's as we start to define our corners and edges, it's really, what do you want to do? So we'll start with technology investments. Those are pretty easy if we think about it. As Chris mentioned, there's tools that you can look at out there that will help you overall measure the business impact of learning, corral all of that data that's coming from all of those systems. So we could talk a little bit about those, and also just understanding how do you use tools to your benefit. And the first one we'll look at here is time spent on administrative tasks. So as your ecosystem grows, that's a lot of tools to manage. And it has a waterfall effect. So we often see when companies or organizations have multiple learning management systems, or they're training multiple audiences, internal and external employees, oftentimes the hidden gotcha that nobody expects on the front end is course content administration, or managing courses and maintaining them across multiple systems. If you think about the time it takes to upload a course into an LMS and assign it to your learners, and then you multiply that by the number of LMSs you have, your admin tasks start to add up. Imagine updating that course, and what does that look like? So we have seen people really kind of raising their hand to say, I need some help. The content administrative tasks are getting out of hand. And we've actually had to think about, do we hire another person to handle this burden? So there are tools out there. Content Controller is one of our products that we see people use that help on this content management side of things. There are certainly other distribution tools out there. We're not the only ones, but be thinking about, how does an investment in something like Content Controller help save admin tasks later to free your people up to do the job that you originally hired them to do. It probably wasn't to update content multiple times in multiple systems. It's probably something a little bit more strategic than that. So how do you find technologies to free your people up to do the more strategic work? Another place that we see people finding value in having a centralized view of their content library is understanding what to invest in. So when you start thinking about courses that are accessed across multiple systems, it's not always easy to get the full picture in aggregate of who's taking these courses, which courses are actually getting used, which ones aren't, where should we invest our time, whether it's an off-the-shelf subscription that you have. If you're paying a lot of money for an off-the-shelf content subscription and you don't have visibility into utilization, you might be overspending there. So having the ability to understand what am I subscribing to and who's using it. It's not like unlike the zillions of streaming subscriptions that I have. And I look at that and realize, oh gosh, I've been paying for a bunch of content that I've never actually used. So having that visibility to understand what's getting used that you're paying for is critical. But it also goes back to what are you going to invest more time in improving and maintaining? So as you are able to see content that's getting used or not used, you know which ones to start with and prioritize when it comes to updating courses and making sure your instructional designers are investing their time in courses that are actually getting used. And we heard a recent example from a customer that was just really telling when it comes to translations. So as we all know, translating content is not it's not a cheap endeavor. It's expensive. So companies invest in translations to make sure that they're meeting their learners where they are and providing them with the content in the most effective learning format for them or language that they prefer. One of our customers recently got visibility into content utilization in their APAC market, in their Asia Pacific market, and they had spent a lot of time and money translating their courses into two different types of Chinese. They had simple Chinese and they had traditional Chinese. So they offered the course in both of these variations to their learners to be user friendly. And when they pulled the data back, they realized that less than 1% of that learner population was actually using the traditional Chinese translation. So they were able to revisit, hey, where are we going to be investing our translation services? Our learners are telling us something. We've given them a choice, and they're actually all telling us that they prefer one language variation over another. So having that insight or ability to look broadly across your organization can help you really find ways to save money when it comes to where do you invest in your content going forward. Reporting, creation, and automation is another great example of places that can be time sucks that you might not have expected. So as Chris mentioned, and we looked at that spaghetti map earlier of all those puzzle pieces, all of those systems are collecting data. How they how you get to it can look very different, but what it usually ends up with, or what we see more often than not, particularly on the Watershed side of the house, who specialize in learning analytics to be able to aggregate data from a lot of systems, is it often comes down to exporting a lot of CSV files and then munging them together in an Excel file. And then if you're really fancy, you might throw some pivot tables in there. But as you imagine and then you now have a Excel file on somebody's desktop. And what happens when you have another update to that course or another registration that's come in? So the data side of things is not for the faint of heart. If you really want to think about tools and ways to be efficient, finding ways to automate reports so that you're able to have a reliable source of truth, who's done what, it's updated real time, and you're using things like APIs and learning analytics tools like Watershed or even Power BI to be able to synthesize that data. Less humans doing lots of upload, download, less risk for data fidelity and data integrity getting at risk. If you're looking at files that have been sitting on someone's desktop for a couple of weeks, that's probably not your source of truth anymore. So finding tools and investing in them to help reporting, creation, and automation can really pay for itself in the long run. So Chris, I think
Yeah,
we've talked about technology, but the bigger picture here is aligning with business goals.
that's right. So we have to understand the end in mind. And anytime you go measure things, we can certainly look at a pile of data and go, well, I wonder what I have in here. But I think it's important for L&D to have a seat at the table, listen to your organization, and consider ways that you can do more than just compliance. L&D teams can be a critical role in almost every one of the larger objectives at the business. The organization is typically saying things like, hey, budgets are getting tight. We just went through a RIF. We have to do more with less. We need our existing people to go and do these other jobs and expand their skills. Reskilling and upskilling is important. Talent mobility is enabled by L&D and often only by L&D. So understanding where you want to place your objectives and your goals beyond green check marks, we are in compliance, can help the organization say, look, we are improving performance, and more importantly, we can prove it. And having the ability to have real world outcomes in systems that L&D doesn't normally have access to. That could be sales outcomes. It could be Salesforce. It could be the manufacturing site. It can be warranty claims. There are very real data points within every organization that chart wins. What is winning at your organization? And what can L&D then do to move that needle and prove it? Being able to look at sales training, being able to analyze learners, and when you have access to the outcomes to know, okay, these are the people on our sales team. Here is our rock star. Tammy sells 30% more than anybody else. And we can go into the learning and training experiences that that learner has had and deduce who is doing what, who's answering questions, who's demonstrating skills that lead to this outcome, and what can we do to fill in the gaps with the rest of our population. When an L&D team takes that approach, listens to the organization's goals, figures creative ways to align the training that's going on within the organization, and can prove that you're increasing revenue, decreasing warranty claims, increasing customer satisfaction, increasing those type of metrics, we end up in a really powerful place where L&D is a very valued lever inside the organization that you can pull to drive change. And it's one thing for L&D to show up at the table and be like, hey guys, we can help with these goals. It's another thing to go back and say, hey, we're able to get these insights. Here's a report. And this should align with exactly what you guys said we were going to go do. Next year, we have these 5 exciting things we're going to go work on. And that resonates with leaders at your department level, your district, your region, or at the top. And when L&D starts aligning the things they're doing beyond compliance with those goals and can measure it and can prove it, that's a really powerful thing. And we see those L&D teams grow as the business grows. It is a very real driver of change. Let's go prove it. And you need both tools and program investments in order to do those things.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's start putting the business case together. We've got our corners, but now we've got to fill in. We've got to figure out how do we get to this bigger picture that you just described, Chris, which is really the ultimate goal here. How do we elevate the L&D teams to be strategic partners in the organization? And what tools do we need? And how do we make the case for doing that? So, as I mentioned earlier, we are in budget season. So this is the time of making the ask. So this is where you need to be thinking about what are your initiatives? How do you sell them into the organization? And then ultimately, how do you prove that it worked? And you're always going to have that, anytime we're at budget season, you're always going to have that reflective moment of did this work last year? Did it pay off for you? How so? And so part of this building the bigger picture here is who is it for? Who are you trying to tell this story to? Who are you trying to show the value of your program and investments? And it usually comes down to the C-suite. So knowing who your audience is, and it might not in your organization, but knowing who you're going to be sharing these results with, showing the value, helping illustrate the value of the programs and investments. Each stakeholder might have some certain different things they care about. So understanding your audience and meeting them where they are and telling the story in terms that they understand or will care about is always a great place to start. So strategically, you want to align yourself with what do they care about. And these are pretty straightforward, as you would imagine. Your CFO is probably going to care about cut and dried return on investment. And we'll talk a little bit more about strategies on how you might measure that. But they're going to care about the cost and what you got for the return. Where did the investment go? CTOs and CIOs, the technical side of the house, your IT and security departments, they're going to care a lot about security of the data that you're collecting. Cybersecurity initiatives are more prevalent than ever. So make sure that you consider your CTO audience or your IT audience anytime you're talking about these initiatives. They can be a friend of yours and a champion if you partner with them well, and also listen to them because they have some great recommendations and requirements that you're going to want to care about. CROs, your chief revenue officers, clearly, they're going to be thinking about how do your programs and investments help present and improve the overall revenue of the organization. Not every L&D or training effort will directly align with revenue, but you want to find ways that you can help support those initiatives when it makes sense. And you might be surprised at ways you can help you can help support your CROs and marketing departments. And then, of course, we have our HR group that you might even already be aligned with. But how do the learning and development programs that you have in place or technologies you want to invest in support HR's initiatives as it relates to retention, those upskilling and reskilling moments Chris mentioned? And then we always have the good old compliance. That one's never going away. So compliance is always a place that you're, that's sort of the built-in one that you're going to support. So how do we get there? How do you figure out how to present the story and pull the story together for those big stakeholders? It's a collaborative effort. So you're going to want to look across teams within your organization to help you tell this story and finding those edge pieces and finding those people to collaborate with to help you pull together the information you need to make a compelling case and to also prove out your objectives from the front end. Those are going to be your department managers. Who are you working with? Who are you serving? Where is your learning and training going? What departments are you working with there? Accounting and finance, not always the group you might expect, but they have total visibility into what you're spending on learning technologies. So they have a lot of information, and these are also the experts that are really good at spreadsheets. So they're the ones that can help you do some of the analysis if you need to figure out some of your cost time savings analysis. If you're going to go that far, your accounting and finance team might be the folks to help you with that, along with helping you to have pure visibility into what are you spending today. And don't forget about your learners, your employees, the people that you're actually bringing this training to. They're the ones that are inform you on what's working, what's not, what they'd like to see. So they're your end customer in a lot of cases. What they ask for goes far. So we can talk about return on investment all day long, and we can look at aligning with business goals that meet the big overall business objectives. But at the end of the day, if your employees aren't engaged, if they're not aware of the training that's available to them, you're never going to get off the ground. So you need to make sure that you have buy-in from your learners, your employees that are taking this training on the front line, because they could have some really great insights for you. As you think about the problems to tackle here, and we think about where are you going to help use technologies to make you more efficient, these are pretty basic. We're just going to throw them out here just to give you some suggestions on ways you might be thinking about how do I make a case in my organization. And it's all about automation and efficiency. Are there technologies or tools that can help you do your job easier or faster, streamline things? Most importantly, if you're looking at repetitive tasks, like we saw earlier in the content updating example across systems, rethink how you do that. Is there a technology that can help you do that smarter to allow the person that's behind the scenes of that administrative task to do the work that you really want them to be doing? So helping find ways to identify where technologies can make you faster and more efficient, and helping build that case for getting those technologies in place. Continuing on that theme, you're looking at where are you spending time and money today? What would it look like if you replaced that with a tool so that that person could do more for you in different ways? And you might find some really great opportunities here to make a case for investing in a tool like Content Controller or Watershed that saves time on the back end and actually pays for itself. And this isn't isolated to those two products. We just happen to be really familiar with them. But this is the place where you want to really make the case for a technology investment, not because it's the cool, sexy thing that you buy next because everybody else is, but being intentional about what you think it's going to do for you and having a way to actually measure and evaluate if it did just that. And before I hand it back over to Chris, I think the thing that you really want to look at when you're looking at investing in tools is the alternative. What happens if you don't do this? Does that person continue to do those manual tasks? And as a result, do we fall behind in other areas? So what's your risk profile? If you don't invest in technology and continue to operate as you are, what happens? And that's a big story to be able to tell your big key stakeholders and shareholders is, if we don't do this, if we do this, we get X. If we don't do this, this is what happens. So being able to tell that story is really important.
So on the Watershed side, we put a lot of effort into being able to measure the impact of these tools. Tammy, I think on the next slide, we've got a pyramid here that can walk us through this process that's able to frame up how we're measuring these things. We're not geniuses at this thing. There are actually 5 different PhD level thought processes to do this, and we typically use Kirkpatrick, but I know there are people on this call that want to argue with me about which of those is better and which of these levels is most important, and I really enjoy that. So happy to go wrestle that with you if you have strong opinions on it. But for sake, we've got Kirkpatrick here on the screen, and Watershed A has two or three ebooks out on measuring the learning impact. And what's cool about that series is that it's an annual publication that starts to show you the growth over time. And as we've been working with large Watershed customers, we're putting real world examples in there. Light teas, we've got a new one coming out for 2024 in the next couple months. So if this is a topic that excites you, good news. We're going to update that and get that out pretty soon as well. What this process actually does, without getting a PhD in its understanding, is find the learners and the training and what's going on and get their reaction. Are people engaged in the learning? Do we enjoy these type of things at all? Then you measure, are they actually learning what you are intending them to do? Can they get skills out of the words and videos that they watch? Can we measure the application of those skills into their job? And then the driving behavioral change at your organization. And when you frame it up like this, it's less of your opinion, it's less of your thought about, well, do I know what works? Having a methodology to follow and using one that resonates with you is important, because what I've learned about showing data and reports and things to every stage in the organization, but certainly at the top, is that if you do the perfect job and you put out the perfect insight and the perfect report, somebody clever should ask a question. Always. If it really resonates with the folks that you're targeting this report to show, hey, learning and development did this thing, 100% of them should go, but did you consider this? Did you consider this? What about this piece of data? Hey, what about these things? And that is when you know you're doing it. And anchoring to a measurement strategy, anchoring to something like Kirkpatrick can help you not only defend the reports that you're showing, but also show the process and let people intervene in that process. Opinions on these things matter. And when opinions come out of data and insights and reports, we can drive change in the organization. I think a lot of times people look at Watershed and look at some of our big data things and go, yeah, but what about this? And I just begin to smile and get excited because you care. And anyone who says, yeah, but what about this, is working on the problem with you. So having a structure that you can anchor to and show people quickly how you got where you are means that those good questions that drive what happens next come out quicker and faster and better. So if you're into measuring learning impact, we're all about that right now. And I would love to kind of scratch into some of those things in the context of what you're working on. And anchoring to one of these different methodologies is key, and it is important in order for you to drive change. Tammy, I think you're going to help us look at how we put all of these examples together. Oh, no, I'm lying. It's me. I'm going to keep talking about it. So the the outcomes are less theoretical these days. When Tammy and I were in meetings 1, 2, and 3 of Watershed way back in the day, we would have had a party if we had known that some of these outcomes from these tools actually hit in the real world in the way that we imagined them. It always takes longer than you think it will, but we've done it. And some of that's kind of exciting to me. So, um, there are really two things that you invest in an L&D department. We talked about it earlier, the tools and the programs. The tools here are ours, and we've seen a lot of changes. There are competing tools in the market, so I want to stay a little bit neutral here and just drive the topic forward. But Content Controller can help organizations centralize all of their content, to be able to have one source of truth for their library, to be able to update things in one spot and have it hit each of their learning technologies live in real time without talking to LMS administrators. It becomes a single source of truth so that you can track a learner's progress through this course regardless of the environment that they launched it from. being able to deploy content into a third party LMS, your own, this contractor's thing, and understand that, hey, across all 5 of these LMSs, no one's ever answered question 3 correctly ever. Did Chris mark the wrong answer as correct, or are we not teaching that properly? We've seen companies come back and say, hey, we intervened in learner 30 instead of learner 30,000 and saved like 20 years of human productivity and retraining that thing. We can't have people missing this question across the board. That keeps us from compliance. So we've seen these type of insights in real time make real impact. We can reduce administrative tasks. I don't know why this is true, and I'm sure Tammy's seen it before, but every single LMS administrator I've ever talked to in my career has 47 other jobs. I don't know why that is true, but anything that can take some work off an LMS admin's plate frees up a lot of cycles for other things. And having tools like Content Controller that can allow you to connect to an LMS and just leave them alone for a while is appreciated across the board. And it makes pulling compliance really easy. I've got examples of some large transportation companies that are acquiring different organizations all the time. And on day one, not having to replace the LMS in a very high compliance environment, but instead using Content Controller so that home office can get compliance courses into these environments is monumentally powerful. And being able to show regulators that you're in compliance across all of these different systems and all of the ways that impacts you is really meaningful and saves a lot of time, money, effort, but most importantly, reduces risk. It drives towards some of those organizational goals. On the Watershed side, we're plumbing data from everywhere. We try and get data from the 20 to 30 systems into one spot. We understand what's going on. We can see real world performance. We can see learning and training, and we can see the meetings that happen in the middle. Identifying the gaps, understanding who your top performers are and what the rest of the population needs to get there is something Watershed does all the time. It can automate reports. I've got 2 different automotive clients that said, hey, I've got 2 people on staff, and because Watershed is in real time putting out data insights, these 2 people were doing it by hand every week. And now they can actually go push the ball forward down the field. We can make progress. So automating a lot of the stakeholder reporting, especially in a high compliance environment, saves time, and those folks can go push on things that are impactful. And we also want to understand utilization. Tammy told a great example earlier of, hey, is anyone even using this language version? That was really expensive. It was, 5 figures to get that content translated into a language no one was using. Being able to understand the content utilization, being able to understand who's doing what, can help a team build content that's meaningful to folks, that's appealing, to be able to justify the investment on making things fun. It's really, really important. And Watershed is a tool in the toolbox that can give you access to all of those things that are otherwise kind of locked away. If we look at some real world examples, Tammy, I think we've got a few next. SANS Securing the Human is one of the largest InfoSec training companies in the world. They're a huge user of Content Controller. And I mean, props to their team. Dan and Steven are work friends of ours at this point. But using Content Controller, they spent the time to implement Content Controller really well. They made it a core part of their content team's workflow, and they're saving over 6 figures on not having to grow their team to support delivery of content to each one of their customer sites. They're working efficiently, they're working smarter, not harder, and Content Controller is the sharp tool in the toolbox that saves them that effort. With a large healthcare company, we saved them, a full-time employee that was doing data entry who now gets to go push and do more exciting things that drive change within the organization instead of spending 40 hours a week updating things and keeping versions in place and doing manual data entry. Having a sharp tool that is a part of a workflow enables folks to go work on the things that they actually want to work on to advance themselves, their career, their organization, and the specific program that they're involved with. At alarm.com, automating content and administration allowed their instructional designers to make updates immediate. When you're in a high technology organization and you're doing product training and things are constantly evolving, being able to update it once in real time and fix all of those highly technical errors across all of the different learning systems saves time, money, effort, retraining. It's amazing. And alarm.com was able to prove that driving those changes made an impact. If we can go one more, Tammy. So we also had some real world success with a large financial service company. They did some gamification. It was a buzzword, and it still is, and it's fun, and it makes sales training a little less terrible. And I believe, as a gamer myself, that these things have meaningful impact and can help people learn and change, but it's hard to prove. And with a very large organization, we were able to prove that salespeople that played the game could identify 4 times more opportunities in that type of transaction in front of a customer than the average. Gamification works. It drove that change in a big, meaningful way, and we were able to prove that. We also looked at a different large group, and they said, hey, L&D wants to implement a pre-test and a post-test and have dynamic content in the middle. Every instructional designer on this call is like, yeah, we want to go do that. We were able to use Watershed and look holistically at that whole program and prove that having a pre-test that eliminates redundant content that everybody has to take every year of their career, if you can test out of some of that stuff and demonstrate that you have the knowledge and skills necessary to be in compliance with that program, we'll let you not have to remediate those things. And they, in the first year, they saved 17 human years of productivity. Their team understood the assignment. They already knew what to do, and not having to take another boring e-learning course that year saved a massive amount of human capital. And I would imagine increased in sentiment as well. No one wants to be bored. So I think it's really interesting to have these 5 use cases together that really drove change within an organization. Tammy, I think you're going to go into a specific one with content control.
Yeah, so those are like, we already sold it in, we saw the value, and then this continues to be able to support continuing those investments, right? So we've seen the ability for people to show the return on investment. Spending this on technology means that we actually save this much money, time, customer experience, whatever it is on this other side of things. But let's back it up a step and get back to sort of one of the things we want to leave you with today as we're sort of closing things out here is putting that case together. And so this is an example of what we worked with. One of our customers was looking at bringing content controller into the organization and how are they going to be able to convince stakeholders that it was relevant and valuable to them. And so this is a great example of sort of breaking down what we've talked about today, identifying who your stakeholders are, who are the people that will use this, who do you need to convince that there's value. And in this example, there were 4 different groups across the organization that we were able to look at to say content controller can provide value to these groups. And then we'll look at how. So what's the value proposition for using content controller to support the technology and development team? And we looked at streamlining processes and money saving. So that's what we kind of go back to from the very beginning of this conversation around what's the return? Does it save you time or money? You'll see that time and money, the pig and the plane, and these little icons are absolutely, consistent across all of the teams. So whether it's technology and development, learning administration, business development, or HR and business operations, aligning your vision, your objective, whether it's to buy a tool or implement a program, figure out who your stakeholders are, figure out what matters to them. And then in this case, we were able to actually even correlate what features and functionality in Content Controller will help the technology and development department achieve their goals. And you can see that we've sort of aligned each of those features and functionalities with those things. This was a collaborative effort. We worked with the customer on helping create this so that they could go and defend their ask to the organization and build champions across all 4 of these teams. So a lot of that is just setting up how are you going to pitch this? What's your ask? How are you going to sell what your what you're bringing to the group. If you're asking for more investment in your next budget cycle, having the arguments in front of you, well thought out, completed picture to help others see this is my vision. If you've probably been wondering about what all the pieces have been sprinkled around the slides throughout this, congrats, it is now it's it's dogs playing soccer, so that's exactly what you would expect. But this is the big picture, so being able to show that big picture and having the story to tell is the path to get there. So um here's one of our lovely bear puzzles that we built that we put together not very long ago. So thank you for bearing with us as we puzzled through this topic today with you. Hopefully this gave you some ideas on how you might think about strategically approaching the problem around what value do your learning technologies and investments bring to the overall organization. How do you know that they're working? Most importantly, how do you know they're working? Whether it's just for your own validation to know my theory was correct, my hypothesis was correct, I have the data to prove it, let's move on. Or if others ask the question, that you're well armed with an answer so that you can have success across the organization and that the organization is it's useful for them. It's useful for everybody. So we don't want anybody to feel like they're just throwing something out there and they never know what happens next. This is the place where you want to be thoughtful about how do I know what's happening next and is it what I expected? And there's tools today to help you get there. Um, so yeah, speaking of tools to help you get there, oops, hang on. I have we have some resources for you. Chris mentioned that Watershed has produced the measuring the business impact of learning report annually. I think for we're on year 8 at this point, so we have a huge history of producing this report. He teased that the 24 version is coming soon, and I think somebody asked a question earlier on how they get that report. You'll be able to access the 23 version. This QR code is going to give you a slew of resources to help you navigate both that business impact of learning report as well as another recent white paper we produced with our sister companies around ROI and how to use ROI within your learning ecosystem. If you have joined us today, we will also be sending you the next MIBLE, the 20, we call it lovingly MIBLE because measuring business impact of learning is a mouthful. So the 24 report that Chris mentioned will be coming out, and we will be able to send that to you as soon as it's ready. So expect that coming in your inbox once we have that available here in the next couple of weeks. And with that, I know we've got a little bit of time for questions. So as we kind of wrap things up here, um, if you're still puzzled, um, we're here. We're here for it. So ask away if you've got some questions. All right. It looks like someone had a question around, is there anything to look at within the procurement process when choosing technologies? And that's a great question. We didn't talk a lot about procurement today, and it's certainly a big piece of the equation when it comes to how do you buy things for your organization. Depending on the size of your org, procurement may or may not be a critical partner in this adventure. Chris, I think you work with customers quite a bit that are navigating the procurement process and
Mhm.
have helped them sort of figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big processes, sure, everybody wants to buy tools and technology, but procurement's there to make sure they're the right tools. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that are like, "Oh, I'm so scared of them." I love working with procurement. They're very straightforward and very driven. And one of the key things to remember is, especially when aggregating big data, um, the organization will always say, well, I mean, we have all these systems, we could write reports, we could put it together. You can. In the era of Power BI, Snowflake, Tableau, like those tools exist. And I think that they are not offsetting what we're talking about today. They can enable things. Often big brands that have those teams in place, when you get to procurement, they'll say, why wouldn't we just use Power BI to aggregate data and show these things? And you get to kind of unpack it with them. Well, um, they have to plumb data from 10 or 15 systems. And those technical teams have very smart humans on them, and they'll join a call and say, yeah, we could do that work. And the L&D team often says, but you said that last year. You said that the year before. No one wants to go do some of those things, and often those teams are under pressure from other initiatives, other business things. They're plumbing the data together on the financial side to help the CFO. Being able to work with teams it through procurement to identify the build versus buy, what is your alternative to working with us is really important. I think we can put it in the chat, but we have a guide on learning technology best practices. I think it's like 5 that you can go through. And please, if you ever have questions around the best strategies for making sure that these are the right tools, please ask. Procurement is there to help us all, not to stand in our way. And framing the right energy around unpacking those things is a core part of the process to make sure that these are the right tools for your team. So don't view procurement as a challenge that can't be met. Instead, view them as a rigorous part of making sure that these are the right tools for your team. And when you approach it in that way, I think you get to a much better outcome. It speeds up the process and it helps those large data teams understand that with these tools, Content Controller or Watershed, we can be one data source that fuels a data lake and they don't have to go plumb 10 platforms together. So it's a win-win for everybody involved, and hopefully the best practices guide can walk you through some of those things.
Cool. So someone else asked a question that I thought was really interesting, and it's what if you go through all of this and you don't achieve your goals, which is absolutely possible.
Yeah,
So part of
yeah.
this isn't that should be something that you don't be scared of that. Just like Chris mentioned, don't be scared of procurement. They're your partner in this and they can be a champion for you and protect you. The whole purpose of defining your goals and objectives on the front end and having the ability and the foresight to build in the measurement capabilities to validate that those theories, objectives, hypotheses were true or not, that's exactly what this process is about. So yes, do you want to be have a home run every single time and you just nail it on those objectives and goals and say, yes, we did it and we proved it and we've saved 5x what we thought we were going to. Yeah, that's awesome. That's dogs playing soccer. But sometimes you're going to end up with results that you weren't expecting, but that's actually as valuable, even though it might be a little painful to see it at first. That's the purpose of having this check and balance to be able to say, this is what I expect to have happen, this is what I'm investing in, and understanding what actually happened in the real world, because that allows you to reevaluate what you're doing. And that actually makes you an even more strategic partner in your organization. So being able to own, we thought this was going to happen and it hasn't happened yet, or we're going to pivot and change because of what we've learned. I can guarantee you that the conversation we looked at a little while ago around those translation services and that investment in multiple languages 2 years ago probably started as a conversation of we have to do this because for us to be accessible and to meet our learners where they are, and we know that they live in this part of the world and that these are the languages spoken, we have to meet and translate it in all of those possible languages to be that inclusive and accessible. Awesome. That was the intent. And then they got the data that said, actually, our theory was incorrect. We didn't realize that the majority of the people that work here or live in this part of the world are actually more familiar with simplified Chinese than traditional, and we don't need to continue to maintain both of those language versions. So don't be afraid that the data that you get back isn't what you thought it was originally. That's how you learn and grow and apply it and improve the next round of your programming.
Facts are friendly.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
I
so
think
don't be afraid of
Watershed
the data.
had an example early on of a sales manager saying, "Hey, I intervene after every call on my team, and we talk and I coach them, and I think that drives sales." And the outcome after a year of pulling the data together was that, ooh, that actually hurts sales. And anytime you're presenting that type of data to folks, we have to be able to pivot around it. And luckily, that team was super on it. They understood the person wasn't hurt by the thing, and we were able to pivot and go to training that worked, that did drive sales. Facts are friendly when you get into those things, and some of studying this stuff is understanding what works and what doesn't. And when you get to what doesn't, that's also a good outcome.
Speaking of outcomes, thank you for joining us today. So,
Sure.
and listening to Chris and I talk about a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. So thanks for bearing with us and putting up with our puzzling topic for the day. If you do have any questions or things that you think about after this, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help you untangle this puzzle, particularly as we are all going into the time of year where we might have to use these skills and build these business cases. We're happy to help you do that, just like we did for a customer we showed you earlier. So yes, thank you. Happy Wednesday, everybody. And thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.